Hey guys, I'm glad you joined me on the Confident Man podcast. We are continuing our March Man month, and today we have part two of our conversation with Dr. Louis Markos. Now, what we're talking about is classic literature and men, and how reading some of the great classic literatures can help us be better men. And Dr. Markos is an authority on that. He's written 25 different books. He's an English literature professor. And I saw him on the great courses, C.S. Lewis in his writings, and really enjoyed it. And I think he has a lot to say to us as men. And really focusing on reading the great stories can help us be better men. So today we're going to be talking along the themes of the great stories, what we can learn from them. And then toward the end, Dr. Markos gives us some recommendations of books that he thinks would be a good start for us, things we can start reading. Now, I'm going to put all the links of those in the show notes, along with all the information to Dr. Markos' Amazon page and other ways you can find out more about him. So check out the show. I think you'll enjoy it, and I think it'll help you be a better man.
Welcome to the Confident Man Podcast, empowering men with the confidence they need to live their adventure. Now, here is your host, David Maxwell.
Now, that wonderful speech, someday the race of men may fall, but that day is not today. It was actually not in the book. It was written, one of the best editions in the whole series. But it is very, very faithful to what Tolkien is doing and to the understanding of, we have to walk into the trap and be bait. But we will stay true. We will not be, what's that word? Harry, that's not Harry Carey. One of those, what are the guys that blow themselves up in the planes?
Oh, the kamikazes?
Kamikaze, thank you.
Yeah.
No, that is not courage, okay?
Yeah.
That is recklessness, right? No American, that was the horror of Vietnam War. Americans never saw this, a person strapping dynamite to themselves and walking into a barracks and killing them. No American does that, no true American, because we have a respect for human life that is Judeo-Christian. But that doesn't mean we'll say, I will go into that lair, that den, with a 2% chance of survival. But that is totally different than blowing yourself up. That's is true. Completely against any kind of Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman understanding of what true heroism is. And the great fantasy shows us that.
Yeah. I remember the first time reading the Chronicles. I was older because I hadn't come across a lot of the books, and finding myself wanting to be Reepicheep. I was like, of all characters, the smallest character, but the one with the most courage, the one who was willing to go and do. And I remember through the whole book thinking, that's who I want to be. I want to have the attitude of Reepicheep and what he does and how his attitude is. And to me, that just kind of shows how even a character that you would not look at and think, oh, this is going to be a great character, but reading it, he's one of the ones I remember the most.
1 second, I'm finding one of the greatest of all speeches.
He gave a lot.
Yeah, here it is. Okay, they know that to go to the end of the world carries great risk, and this is what Reepicheep says. My own plans are made. While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she fails me, I paddle east in my canoe. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge of the world in some vast cataract, waterfall, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise, and Peepakeek will be head of the talking mice in Narnia. Okay. My kids grew up with the Disney Channel, and it's okay. But they always said, follow your dreams, follow your dreams. Well, what they mean by follow your dreams is you can be a pop star for 3 days, okay? Yeah. This is what it means to follow your dreams, okay?
Yeah.
That you are seeking the truth, no matter the cost. You are moving for, the risk, and the cost. But your eyes are on the true prize, Aslan's country, ultimately heaven.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of courage we need. And that's the kind of courage that true fantasy calls us to. We need to understand, and I love the way the movie did it. When Aragorn, along with Legolas and Gimli, take the paths of the dead,
Yeah.
right? That those are the oath breakers. Now, again, I probably would have done the movie the same way, but in the movie, we're given the idea that Aragorn is risking his life, that these ghosts can kill him. Okay, ghosts cannot kill you. Okay, they have no body, they cannot hold a sword. Again, I would have probably given into the temptation as a movie maker when the ghost came to the Battle of Pelennor Field and killed it. That doesn't work. Okay, they don't have bodies, they cannot do that. So, what is the courage that Aragorn? It's not so much the courage of being stabbed; it is the courage of facing that which he fears the most. What Lewis liked to call the numinous, right? The facing mortality, our own death. That, in other words, the real danger is not that he's going to be stabbed. The real danger is that he's literally going to die of fear, being in that eerie, like being a brave man and going through a cemetery, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm facing the unknown. And that's what he does, and his friends come with him as well. And actually, I don't mind. In the book, the two brothers of Arwen join him. They're not mentioned in the movie because they really don't do much. But Arwen does have two brothers who are checking out their soon to be brother-in-law. So they're checking him out, but they also go with him into the past and the dead. But that's the kind of courage, that Frodo has. I don't know the way, but I will bear that ring. Right? I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know how to get there, but I will do it. I will bear the weight. I will be the ring bearer. That's the kind of courage that we get in real fantasy, not just getting your own back on the bullies and winning a prize or something.
Yeah, that's a great point, because like one of the things I learned reading the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, was the depth of feeling men have. I mean, these were warrior men who would break out into a song in a moment's notice. And I didn't really, when I read through it, it didn't hit me as much as when I listened to it. The guy who did it on one of the Audible series I have, he started singing.
Oh,
and
yes,
I thought they do
Rob
sing,
English,
don't they?
probably.
Yeah, it was Rob.
He not only does every single voice, he sings in every single voice.
Yeah, he sings in the voice.
And by the way, if you can't get a man to read a novel, try to get him to read a poem. Okay.
Yeah.
So they are continually, and by the way, the Rohirrim, most of their poems are done in the same style as Beowulf, because they really are the Anglo-Saxons, except Tolkien gives them horses, so they'll be perfect.
Yeah.
There's one horse, but they don't fight on horses in Beowulf. So he does that in there. But you're right. It is that also that sense of camaraderie of the men that fight side to side. Now, this dialogue was added. It's not in the book, but I think it's faithful to it. And anybody that's seen the movie remembers it, because elves and dwarves have been enemies for a long time. But this beautiful friendship springs up between Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf, and as they're preparing to fight at Helm's Deep in the second movie, Gimli turns to Legolas and says, "If anybody ever told me I would die side by side with an elf," and of course Legolas says, "How about side by side with a friend?"
Yeah,
laddie, I can do that. I want to tell you one thing that I did not know, and I try to pass this down to my students, and please pass this down to people. A lot of evangelicals, right? We have this idea that when you get married, husband and wife are supposed to be everything to each other, and you don't need anyone else because you've found your soulmate. Well, the idea of the soulmate is not biblical. It's platonic. Okay, it is absolutely essential. And please tell your listeners, it is absolutely essential for a successful marriage for the man to continue to have close male friends that he does things with apart from his wife, and for the wife to continue to have close female friends with whom she does things. Now, if you're a good husband and your wife is hanging out with women who are utter gossips, spending money, who are absolute good-for-nothing people, then you probably need to encourage her to leave. In the same way, if you're a good wife and your husband gets together with men who only get stinking drunk every weekend, then you should speak up, okay?
Yeah.
But other than that, you need to allow them, because there are certain things that men can only talk about with other men and women can only talk about with other women. And this nonsense that men and women always have to be together is not biblical. It's also not rational. It's an American thing, and that's one nice thing, I guess. In America, still compared to Europe, the sexes mingle much more in America than they even do in Europe today.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's good, but it's also bad because we never have the conversations we need to have. You know the old joke, David. If a man says to his male friend, "Hey, let's go up into the woods and light a fire, and we'll sit around and talk about life and share our stories and struggles," he'll be like, "What? You gay?" But if he says, "Let's go up, build a fire, talk about our lives, and while we do it, kill a few animals," then it's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but again, there is a need for that male bonding that is extremely important. And that's one of the things you see in fantasy with something like The Fellowship, as they are together. One of the things that the movie of Prince Caspian ruined, and it really is sad, is that, okay, if you know Prince Caspian, the novel, what happens is that in the second half of the novel, the boys and girls split up. While the boys are fighting on the battlefield, and Peter particularly is having his one-on-one duel with Miraz, what are the girls doing? Susan and Lucy. Do you remember, David? I don't know if you remember the book that way.
I don't remember.
Susan and Lucy are riding on the back of Aslan, going throughout the countryside, setting free the countryside, waking up the trees.
That's right.
Okay. Now, they completely leave that out in the book,
do.
in the movie. And instead, they allow Susan to get in the battle and kill about 100 people with her bow and arrow. Now, is that an affirmation of femininity? I think most girls, if they have not been corrupted already and told what to believe, if you say, "Would you rather fight on the battlefield or ride on the back of Aslan and wake up the trees?" I think we know what they're going to say, right?
Yeah.
So that wonderful sort of affirmation of masculinity and femininity is gone from the movie, and it's beautiful, right? And it's important because what the boys and girls are doing are equally important. Without what the girls are doing, the boys are going to lose, right? Just like, despite all the heroism of attacking the Black Gate at the end of Lord of the Rings, all of it is meaningless if those two little hobbits are not able to destroy the ring. Okay, so the two need to come together. But again, we need an understanding of courage, and boys need a specifically masculine understanding of courage. That's very, very important. And again, fantasy, just if it's good fantasy, it does that well.
Camaraderie also shows that everybody has their role. And that a role that is not maybe the upfront person is just as important, because, if Legolas and them didn't do their job, the hobbits wouldn't have been able to do their job. And I think that helps men realize that, hey, I'm here to do my role. I don't have to try to be someone else, try to act like someone else. And I think that's something you miss when you don't read the stories like that.
Yeah. And we lose the dignity and meaningfulness that goes with each of the tasks, and how they need to come together. And again, oddly enough, Avatar shows that we get the basically land Indians and the water Indians, and in both cases, the male figure is the protector, but the female is sort of a little bit more of a mystic and making sure. Like I said, there is an understanding of a meaningfulness and an importance to each of the roles.
Yeah, and I know that's where talking with fans of Lord of the Rings, when Amazon came out with their prequel kind of thing, I mean, it was just, people are just like, why did you mess up what was already there? Why did you feel like you had to do this or that or the other? And how can a girl who weighs 124 pounds beat up?
She gets so grating. By the very end, it gets a little better when we realize that she's kind of doing all of this because she's trying to live up to her brother. But yeah, she gets so grating. Oh my God! I saw a funny meme where your parents tell you, if you keep making funny faces, your face is going to freeze like that. And so they showed her, freeze, her face frozen with that obnoxious, unending sneer that she has. Oh my gosh! I mean, like I said, unlike three of the great female characters in film or novel, Galadriel, Arwen, and Eowyn in the Lord of the Rings, and it was a little bit annoying what they did in the Hobbit, when they created that female elf. But
Yeah.
that girl, Evangeline Lilly, is so wonderful and feminine that it got by somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it worked. Another one just recently, a great series called The Man. Oh my God, The Man in the High Castle. If you watch
Uh-huh.
that, the female figure in there is very strong, but she's very feminine throughout
Yeah.
and does a
Yeah.
very good job. I mean, it can be done. Uh, and I was reading an interview with Evangeline Lilly when she was starting to say, yeah, she's starting to realize that when they just take a female character and make her into a man with breasts, she's got no backstory. She's got no connection to family. She doesn't want to play those figures anymore, she was saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
She wants to play figures that are full characters, female characters that
Yeah.
care about people. And that was pretty interesting. I don't remember where I read that, but that was
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I remember reading something like that, but it was Emily Blunt talking about that.
Oh, yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just you can be strong and feminine.
yeah,
And you're not trying to take over. Everybody has their role and it's different.
yeah.
So let me do this. Let's get a little practical. If there's men out there as they listen to this, they say, okay, where do I start in reading fantasy literature? Where would you say is kind of the beginner for someone who hasn't done a lot of reading to kind of get in? Don't try and tackle something that might overwhelm them. What would be some advice you give to them on what to read, how to read, things like that?
I mean, I always like starting with the Odyssey. It's much easier than the Iliad. And the Odyssey is about Odysseus coming home. Now, I was just writing an article about it just this week. And today we overdo this idea of, the double standard, Odysseus is sleeping with all these women. Okay, he sleeps with only 2 women, and both of them are goddesses, and both of them are about survival. Okay, so I'm not justifying from a Christian point of view adultery, but if you read it, the whole point about the Odyssey is that Odysseus, it's not that he sleeps with the 2 goddesses, it's that he leaves and goes home, okay?
Yeah.
He's got the ultimate male fantasy. He's living on an island with Calypso, the most beautiful nymph of all, who is about to make him immortal, and he says, nevertheless, I must go home. And by the way, if you go back and watch it, amazingly, the 3 great manly movies, and these are all basically the same movie archetypally, Braveheart, Gladiator, and Patriot. They're basically the same movie, all good movies. And in all 3 of them, our hero is a very manly man who is a widower, who still loves the memory of his wife and doesn't really love again. I mean, it's kind of amazing. We kind of forget this in those things. Powerful, powerful movies. But again, the Odyssey is about a man who, see, when we think of Odysseus today, we think of a man with a wanderlust. But that comes from Dante and Tennyson. The Odysseus of the Odyssey, he's called Ulysses in Latin. The Odysseus of Homer is a person who wants to get home, who tries to maintain his integrity and who he is, and goes home and fights to preserve his home and helps to make his son Telemachus come of age. So that's always a good place to begin. The next place, if you haven't read The Lord of the Rings, you got to read The Lord of the Rings. Now, it's a little bit slow going in the beginning, mostly because Tolkien had no idea what he was doing for the first 100 or 150 pages. Lucky took his time and got in there. And anyway, persevere through. I love Tom Bombadil, but he really has nothing to do with anything. But he's still fun. But anyway, persevere, because you are going to see role models of all kinds that are there. And you know what people used to read in the old days? They used to read, what's that guy's name? Sir Walter Scott, Ivanhoe. That's not a bad old novel to go back to. Ivanhoe is a great hero in the time of the Crusades. And there's still a lot to be said for that kind of heroism. Or what is it? The guy that fights Napoleon, Horatio Hornblower. More recently, you have the Captain and Commander series. What is the name of that series? Aubrey, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a whole series. It's the same time, the Napoleonic Wars, about an admiral or a captain. And the movie, Captain, Master and Commander, that's the name of the movie.
Yeah, Master and Commander.
Based on those novels that are very good for portraying a man learning to be a man. Coming of age stories. I mean, even something like Huckleberry Finn. Now, this is a boy rather than a man, but it is a boy learning about responsibility. And it is a classic, but it's an easier, and not Moby Dick is very difficult to read. But Huckleberry Finn is not a difficult read. And it captures what it means to come of age. Now, it's a little more difficult, but if you want to try the Aeneid is about a man who is tasked to leave his home. Troy is burning to the ground, and lead the survivors to found a new city in Rome that will become the Roman Empire. And he struggles mightily. Now, that's a little bit harder poetry, but there's no reason why you can't buy what's called a prose translation. In other words, it's translated into prose like a novel rather than poetry. I know I should feel very bad telling you that as an English professor, but that's okay. If you get a good prose, Penguin has an excellent prose translation of the Odyssey that I used to teach from. It's also very, very accurate. So that's okay to do that. But you want to read the stories of these people who had a heavy task put upon them and followed that task and lived it out. Trying to think of other ones offhand that all the boys would read these stories about. And by the way, this is not fiction, but if you read martyr biographies, what's his name? William Lane Craig, one of the greatest living apologists, is continually reading missionary stories. They're not always martyrs, but missionary stories. Here's a different kind of courage. Somebody that goes in the middle of nowhere, learns a new language, all that sort of stuff. Those are often very, very good reading and show the courage, the turnaround that happens in these lives, which is pretty amazing. With kids, there are simplified versions of like Charles Dickens or something. That's not bad reading or even reading out loud. I mean, Christmas Carol is always wonderful. That's one of the great moral stories ever written. But do this together. Read them out loud and discuss them together and talk about, because look, Dave, I don't know if you saw this, but with kids, when you watch a movie with them, what is the first question they ask you? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? They want to know what the moral tenor of this world is. I mean, they always ask, especially if it's that kind of an action movie. And talk about that. What makes the good guy good? I mean, the best death scene in all of Hollywood history is the death of Boromir, and it actually is superior to the death of the novel. And here is someone who is messed up, but at the end, he has died with heroism. Right? It would be the fantasy version of a deathbed conversion, sort of speak. And it's powerful. And it's also powerful because in the death of Boromir, Aragorn finally realizes who he is. And again, the dialogue's a little bit different, but it's ultimately faithful. And, what does he say to him? He says, "Don't worry, I will not let the White City fall or our people perish." And that's the phrase added to the novel. And that's when Boromir says, "our people," and he realizes that Aragorn has become the full man who fully identifies with his people and his role. And it's a little bit different in the novel, but I think it works extremely well in the movie, and it's ultimately faithful to the character arc of Aragorn and what he must do. And by the way, it's not explained in the movie, but in the novel, basically Elrond is not going to give his daughter to Aragorn until he is the king of the United Kingdom. Okay, so hey, that's high stakes. Okay,
good motivation.
My elf rifle over here, and you are going to be worthy of my daughter. And so that's actually a little more explained a little more clearly in the novel. Until he's the king of a full king of Gondor and Andor, he brought back the old kingdoms, and then he is worthy to marry the princess, and save. And that's one of them. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but in the original movie, they even shot some of it where they were going to bring Arwen into battle, and thank God the fans went crazy and stopped them. If that happened today, they might do it. I hate to say it because we've lost our minds, but thank God. Now they did make one change, but I think it was completely okay. In the novel, when Frodo is stabbed by the Morgul blade there, in the novel, it is an elf named Glorfindel who comes to rescue him. He doesn't really do anything else in the novel. So I'm really glad they changed that to Arwen, and that works perfectly. She comes as a healer. She takes him on the horse. That was a good way to give her a fuller role that is consistent with her character. So they made
Yeah.
some changes that were very well thought out and very, very faithful. I mean, whether Tolkien would have liked that, he's an old curmudgeon. He would have complained about everything. That's a silly claim. But I think if somebody explained it to him, he would have seen how faithful this is to the book and the meaning of the book.
Yeah. Well, it's true. Like, I showed my son the movies back when he finally hit like 12, 13. I figured, okay, he's old, and they're his favorite. Like almost every year or two, we rewatch the extended edition trilogy, and the Boromir scene gets us every time.
Now,
it's just such a great, great story.
If there's one thing where you want to get your boy to read the novel, there's only really one weakness in the movie, and that is they don't flesh out Faramir properly.
Yeah.
Now, the actor did a good job. He was also in 300. He's been in a couple other movies. But the full nobility of him that's in the novel doesn't quite get through. For instance, he's never tempted by the ring at all. He understands that there are some dangers from which a man must flee, as Joseph does from Potiphar's wife. But there's a wonderful phrase, a wonderful passage in the novel. And he basically says, I do not love the sword for its sharpness or the arrow for its swiftness. I love only what they defend, the city of men. And by the way, if you read the letters, Tolkien most identified, not with Gandalf, but with Faramir, which comes as a surprise when you read the letters. This is the real dreamer who will fight when he has to, but he loves something higher. And he is in many ways a pupil of Gandalf, and that gets his father mad. You wizard's pupil, things like that. But Faramir is worth fleshing him out a little bit more by reading the novel.
Yeah, that's one thing I do remember when I read it. I love that his character was a lot deeper in that. Yeah. So any other stories before we close out that you want to throw out? I know you mentioned the prose translation as a way to read some of the harder ones. I thought that was very fascinating. Any other tips like that for men?
First of all, when you read the Odyssey, don't feel guilty if you want to skim things, okay? The second half really slows down and gets kind of boring. The first half is more exciting. So it is okay to skim.
Yeah.
I say that even though I never do, because I'm supposed to be a nerdy boy professor. I feel guilty if I do that, but you shouldn't feel guilty. You can skim. You can't do that. And just like the kids did. They used to have simpler versions of I don't know what's it called. Just the one with Long John Silver. Kidnapped and things like that. All of those wonderful old movies. But those adventure books, and that's what boys used to read. And they were exciting, and they drew them in. And the Arabian Nights stories and things like that, bringing back some of the old legends, the King Arthur stories, and Robin Hood stories and things like that. These are just great heroes that are worth digging into.
Yeah, and find those good stories. Well, that's good stuff. Well, listen, Dr. Markos, I appreciate the time and just having the chance to talk with you and talk about how more men need to read. And we're going to put a bunch of links in the show notes for guys. They can find some of these books out there. And we'll put a link to your stuff so they can see some of your books. I know the great course was great. I loved it. And in fact, my son listened to it, loved it too. And so we appreciate you taking the time to do that today.
Hey, well, thanks. Great to be on, and keep up the good work here. And again, I really think the greatest crisis of the next 50 years will be the loss of male leadership.
Yeah.
We're seeing, and a lot of times women look, okay, let me end with this because it's very important. Okay. Is there middle ground on should women be preachers? Okay. Now, I'm very, very conservative and whatnot. But the funny thing is that even though Paul's pretty darn clear about it, there are a few examples like Deborah and other people. But when you look at those examples, what you'll often find is Deborah and Yael are forced to rise up and do it because the man who was supposed to do it is a wimp and abdicates his responsibility. Right? So, if the men refuse to do it, the women will step up and do it. Okay. but they often want the man to move forward and lead and be the ambassador between the family and the rest of the world. Because when the mother's the ambassador, she can be pretty darn scary. Because she is, naturally, viciously tied to her children and is not very just to people outside the family. The man is often more just to people, and that's why he's the ambassador. Again, we need, you know what? I want to say one more thing. I got to end.
Yeah.
I will prove to you that the feminists in America, especially the radical feminists, care nothing for American women. And I'll tell you why. The greatest thing that ever happened to American women in this country was Promise Keepers. Remember Promise Keepers?
Yeah.
All those rallies, men coming together and swearing to each other to be good fathers and good husbands. Also, by the way, given to racial reconciliation, which they always forget about. They were doing that long before it was fashionable. But doing it for Christian reasons, not for virtue signaling.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what women want. And every single time there was a meeting of that, the feminists picketed it and tried to call it sexist, right?
Yeah.
This is what women want, and this is what they need, and this is what families need. But again, they don't want strong male leadership. And that is what we need. And again, reading good stories can help to do that.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I appreciate it, Dr. Markos. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Confident Man Podcast. Click subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can connect with David on Facebook and Instagram at David the Maxwell. Find resources to help you as a man at theconfidentman.me. That's theconfidentman.me.